there. Well, we can speak now to the Life peer John Woodcock, now Lord Walney, who advised the previous Conservative government on addressing political violence. And in the wake of the Trump shooting, he's written to the Home Secretary calling for an inquiry into intimidation of MPs. Good to have you on the programme.
Exactly.
I think we should pick up on what Tamara is saying in just a moment. But first, how much is the assassination attempt on Donald Trump that we witnessed a reminder, I guess, of the real risks that our politicians are taking?
It is. It is a shocking reminder of the vulnerability that everyone who puts themselves in the front line to serve ultimately faces. We are blessed to be here in the UK where there is not the same gun culture as there is in the States. Nevertheless, if you can come within literally less than an inch of taking out a former and perhaps future president with all of the security that his operation entails, it shows, ultimately everyone who puts themselves forward faces that some level of threat. There is no way of reducing that to zero. MPs who put themselves forward to serve their communities, none of them will accept being sealed away behind bulletproof glass. They are there to be part of their communities, to listen. But as your introduction said, and it's great that Yvette Cooper, the new Home Secretary, is taking this forward, that there have been horrific examples in this election campaign, and clearly the line is being crossed into very aggressive and potentially really dangerous intimidation. And it's right that we look at this in the round and try to reset the balance.
Yeah, how much do you think it's getting worse, I guess, is my question. Is it always been the case?
I mean, look,
or is there a toxicity that has entered our debate more recently that is particularly bad?
The review, which I ended up publishing just 24 hours before the election was called, showed that there had been a real rise in that sense of toxicity and hatred, and that feels unsurprising and natural. I mean, we all are aware of the way in which our political discourse has been polarised. Of course, this is not a theoretical threat. We have had 2 of our own MPs here in the UK assassinated, murdered themselves. Our friend Joe Cox in 2016, Sir David Amess. There have been serious attempts on the lives of others. But you certainly have, you cannot fail to pick up in Westminster in recent months that sense of a rising level of fear and intimidation. And that has been tracked by really significant increases in the budgets that need to go towards keeping members of Parliament who are at particular risk safe. I mean, it is extraordinary, it is horrible that you've had examples of MPs having to be given the kind of close protection in recent months that actually in the past has only really been available to the very most senior government ministers, like the Home Secretary, the Foreign Secretary, the Northern Ireland Secretary, requiring that level of protection, not being able to go on public transport, fearing for their families. It is totally unacceptable. It is, of course, a huge worry for them as individuals, but it's also deeply corrosive to our parliamentary democracy, which is, why we have to look at what more we can do to protect MPs, the physical measures, but also look again at the culture and the drivers of some of this hatred and extremism.
What does that mean, the culture and the drivers of hatred and extremism?
Well, I think one of the things that we need to do is to be clearer about the boundary between impassioned debate and the right to protest and have your say, which is sacrosanct here in the UK. It's an intrinsic part of our liberal democracy. But where that can trigger over into the kind of aggressive intimidation, which is not, in fact, about seeking really to change people's minds through argument. It's about placing a level of fear and intimidation that cows people.
Some examples are really easy, right? Like attacking someone's constituency, slashing someone's tyres. So some are very, very easy to deal with.
Yeah.
But there's a whole other spectrum of this where you might have a very different view on where to draw the line as, Dawn Butler, for example, one of our guests. It's difficult, isn't it? Because when people believe very strongly about things, such as whether it's the war in Gaza, whether it's other issues as well, then how do you?
But I think we do sometimes end up conflating people's freedom of speech with the kind of very aggressive behaviour, which, if you took it out of the political context, would clearly be unacceptable, and would see people up on charges of abuse. And I don't think we should be saying, well, that kind of angry hatred is okay in a political context because people feel strongly about it. And that is not the same as saying people should not have the right to protest, or that they should not be able to put their views across very passionately. But I think it is incumbent on us to look at that, where that balance is drawn. And yes, you're right. I think one of the problems of late is that there has been a very different understanding within Parliament, within discussions between politicians, and also particularly with the police, where you've seen a high level of variability with different forces, individuals officers within different forces reacting differently.
Yvette Cooper's going to host a meeting, as we've been saying, of the Defending Democracy Task Force. You, of course, did a long report into this for the last government, I think, as you just said, 48 hours before the election was called.
Thank goodness.
Are you worried that that's just going to be tomorrow's fish and chip wrapper now?
Look, I think many of the recommendations that I put forward are absolutely apposite now, and I hope it had a really good discussions with Yvette and her advisors in the run-up to publishing that report.
Have you spoken to them about it since?
Dan Jarvis talked in the Commons on the day of the election about considering this carefully. I've been in brief touch with him, and obviously put the note up towards the end of last week. I mean, I think there are issues. One of my recommendations, for example, was to have what's called a speakers conference, which is a Harriet Harman idea, actually, and it's a mechanism by which you can bring together the police, government, parliamentary authorities, civil society, to look in the round at this, so we don't all work in silos. I think there is a much needed review of security around Whitehall. That was one of the recommendations. So I think the recommendations are current, but this is a fast-moving situation, and we've just had that big set-piece test in an election campaign. So it's really welcome and right that we update this analysis with a fresh review of what happened in the campaign.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Good to have you on the
Sophie.
programme today, Lord Walney. There has to say as well, it really does sort of resonate with what you were saying about MP safety. I'm always completely shocked when I listen to any MPs about the kind of protection that they need just to go about their daily lives.